Alright, so here's something interesting I want to talk about today. There's this character in One Piece, and in the anime, in the English dub, they call him Eneru. But in the card game, Bondi has translated his name as Enel. And so, some of you might be wondering, which way is the correct way to say it? Do I say it the way they say it in the show, or the way they spell it in the card game? And I'd like to give you a little insight on why it differs. So, I'll start off with this. In Japanese, there are letters that they use to write words. Sometimes they have different alphabets, but one of those alphabets is called Katakana, and Enel's name is spelled this way on the Japanese card in Katakana. That's what these three characters are part of. And so those characters correlate to certain English sounds or certain English letters. So I'll show it like this. So this first one, this is the letter E, basically. So like the first part of Eneru's name, right? Makes sense. And then this next one, this one right here in the middle, and then this third one. So this next one in the middle is ne, N-E. So N. So far so good. And then this third one is where it gets tricky. So technically this is like by default, romanized is the word for it when you put it into English letters, or Roman, what is it? Like the letters of a Romance alphabet, I think is like a Romance language. Anyway, when you convert it into English letters, it's called romanization, and this one is romanized by default as RU. So, Ru. But it's not always that simple, because in Japanese, a U inside a word is often silent. So like, let me give you an example. There's the Naruto character, right? Sasuke, even Naruto, but Sasuke is a more clear example. So his name is spelled this. No one calls him Sasuke. You know, you never hear anyone say Sasuke. They always say Sasuke, like Sasuke. You know, that's how they pronounce it in English and in Japanese. They say Sasuke. So you can basically understand this as the U effectively being silent. This U right here, like if this was not here and it was spelled like this, you would say it basically the same way, Sasuke. And even though this U is here, it's still Sasuke. That's because oftentimes the U is silent. Another example is ski, the word ski spelled like this. So in Japanese, ski desu means I like you, or I like it, or I love it. And it's pronounced ski desu. Des is another example. You don't say desu, you say des, as if the U wasn't even there. You say ski, not suki, as if the U wasn't even there. All this to say that U's in Japanese words are often silent. And so it's just as valid to read this as Eneru as it is to read it with that U being silent. Ener. But that's a little different. I'll get to that later. The next thing I want to talk about, now that we've covered that U's are sometimes silent, is the letter R. So you might have heard before that in Japanese, R and L make the same noise, or you might have even heard that L doesn't exist in Japanese, or neither of them exist in Japanese. And it's effectively true. Like in English, we have R and L, which are very clearly different sounds. Like the color red, we know what you're talking about if you say red. We know you're not talking about lead, like a pencil lead, because we pronounce them very distinctly. Red and lead, R and L are different. In Japanese, red and lead would be pronounced the same way, and it would be red. So it's a weird noise you don't make in English. Red. Like the R and the L, instead of having one noise or the other, both of those noises combined. So it's like you're saying an R sound and an L sound at the same time. So really, instead of Eneru, you might pronounce it Ener, the R and the L at the same time. But since we romanize it as RU by default, we don't, because there is no letter in English letters that makes the R sound and the L sound at the same time. We don't have a letter like that. We just have R and we have L. So they basically just had to pick one or the other, and they picked R. And that's just how the cookie crumbled. So R and L are basically Like they don't have either of them in Japanese. Instead, they have a combination. But when you have to write a Japanese word with English letters, you have to pick one or the other because we don't have a letter that represents both noises at the same time, like they do in Japanese. So you could just as validly romanize this to RU as you could to LU. These are effectively the same exact noise in Japanese. Ru and Lu, they don't have either of them. They have Ru. And you could romanize it either way. A Japanese person would pronounce these the same way. So Eneru is just as valid Eneru as it is Enelu. You can kind of just pick one or the other. And then as for, now we can put those two things together. Ru and Lu being kind of the same thing from this third katakana, and U's being silent. If you take those two concepts together, that's where this Enel comes from. Because they're basically choosing to romanize Ru as Lu, but then dropping the U because U's can basically be silent if you want them to. Because you would pronounce this Eneru, and because of how Japanese people pronounce things, Eneru, you could interpret the U as not being there, and it just being Enel. Eneru. Enel. That's kind of how that works. And then as for why they say Eneru in English in the anime, is because they're just picking this translation of Ru instead of this one, instead of either of these, instead of Lu or just the L. And the last thing I want to talk about is you could say, well, if it could be Eneru or Enelu or Enel, could it be Ener with just an R as if the U was silent, so you just take it off. And here's where it gets a little weird. You could not pronounce his name Ener based on this katakana spelling of it because ER typically will be converted to katakana using the katakana, which if I can draw it here, the katakana actually looks like this. It's I'm drawing in paint, so it's kind of difficult, but it basically looks like that. That's So if you, let me give an example. So the English name Hunter, right? If your name is Hunter, you spell it like this. Now, if you wanted to write Hunter in Japanese katakana, you would convert it to katakana like this. You would have ha, and just trust me on this, ha, so that H-U-N, but you pronounce it, you don't say hunter, you say hunter, which is closer to ha than it is to hoon, according to whoever decided how things get romanized. So this is basically Han, the first part of the name, and then T-E-R, ter, would get romanized as ta. If I can remember what ta is, I believe it's this. And then a line, meaning you hold out the last vowel. So ta with an extra ah. And all together you get hanta. That's how you would convert the name Hunter into katakana, you would get Hanta. And so if Ener's name was Ener, it wouldn't be spelled with these katakana. It would be spelled ne. So the first two would be the same, right? But then you would have oh no, forgive me. The first one would be the same. And then instead of ne for the word Ener, you would have na, which I'm totally blanking on the katakana for na at the moment. Oh, of course. Na. It looks like this, kind of. And then you would hold it out. So if Ener's name was Ener, it would look like Ena in katakana, not Eneru. So all that to say, we know it's definitely not Ener. But the other three romanizations are all equally valid. Eneru, which they use in the anime, Enelu, which they don't use anywhere, and Enel, which they use in the card game. So I hope this answered your question that you might have had of why is it sometimes Enel and sometimes Eneru? And it's because in Japanese, those are the exact same thing. Both of those are Eneru. And we just don't have that exact noise in English, so you have to pick whichever one you feel is closest or most appropriate. Bondi chose Enel, Funimation chose Eneru, and that's all it is to it. Hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.